Hundreds of miles of railroad track crisscross the city of Montgomery. 5 different railroad companies operate within the city. And along with the pulpwood cars, the box cars loaded with refrigerators and automobile parts, are tank cars loaded with potentially dangerous chemicals and explosives.
This is a WSFA TV News special report. The rail risk, the rolling danger around us.
Every day at all hours of the day and night, literally thousands of pounds and gallons of hazardous materials are passing through Montgomery and hundreds of other towns in our state. The tank cars are filled with propane gas, ammonia, phosphoric acid. Box cars are laden with sulfur and other caustic and explosive materials. In all, the federal government has labeled 1,600 items as being hazardous materials, many of which can be deadly in the case of a derailment or other accident involving the train car carrying any of these 1,600 materials. The purpose of this program is fourfold. First, to acquaint you with the extent of rail transportation of these potentially deadly chemicals and other materials, and to recall previous rail accidents and their result. Second, to find out the capabilities of local and state agencies to react to such an accident if it occurred here in Montgomery. Third, to examine the current safety precautions taken by the railroads. And finally, to suggest a procedure for implementation by the railroad and city which may save time and lives in the event of a tragic accident. On September 4th, 1976, units of the Montgomery Fire Department were rushed to North McDonough Street to a derailment involving a tank car leaking highly volatile propane gas. In all, 3 cars were involved, but only one posed any danger to the immediate area. The car contained 30,000 gallons of gas, but was leaking slowly. Firemen stood by at the scene, waiting for word from a federal official in Birmingham as to the procedure they should follow. Luckily, workmen were able to cut off the leak, and the gas was later pumped into another tank car. Railroad officials of the Western Railroad of Alabama didn't seem too worried about the incident, allowing other trains to pass on either side of the derailed car during that day. WSFA TV News was told by one railroad employee that a heavy rain the night before had washed away support under some cross ties, allowing the track to overturn and the car to spill out on the embankment. This was probably the nearest to a potentially disastrous situation in recent months in Montgomery. After it was all over, fortunately, there were no injuries and damage only to the car and to the track. But 2 days later, in western Montgomery, there was another derailment. This time it involved several cars loaded with molasses. Workmen were called in to right the overturned cars and clear the track to make way for more trains to pass. This was another example of the frequency, if not the seriousness, of the problem of train cars leaving the track in or near Montgomery. More than a year later, near Pensacola, Florida, disaster struck on the tracks of the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. In the midst of a posh residential neighborhood overlooking the beaches, more than 1,000 residents had to flee from a poisonous cloud of ammonia spilling from the derailed cars. 1 person was killed, 32 were injured. A full-scale investigation was launched by officials of the National Transportation Safety Board because this was the 30th derailment in Escambia County on L&N tracks in 34 months. The derailment occurred only 2 days after the scene of the accident had been inspected by federal officials. The impact of the incident was reflected in the words of an L&N official.
Obviously, our regret is an emotional thing. What is more important is our determination to be, as we have always been, a good corporate resident of this community. We will cooperate generously and enthusiastically in any investigation to determine the cause of this very serious and very tragic accident.
16 of the derailed cars were carrying liquid ammonia. 1 of them split open and 2 others developed leaks. The spilled liquid quickly turned into deadly gas, which spread into the exclusive Gaborone neighborhood on the bluffs overlooking Escambia Bay. The wind was a life-saving factor in this accident. George Wise, Assistant Pensacola Fire Chief, said the wind changed and blew the ammonia gas over the bay, averting more deaths and injuries. Dr. Chuck Smith, a surgeon who lives near the derailment site, rushed to help police. He said elderly people in the area were having a hard time breathing. He said it was like they were trying to breathe out of an ammonia bottle. The ruptured car stopped about 40 yards from the home of Dr. John Thorshav, who just purchased the house 2 months earlier. Thorshav, his wife, and 2 children were found unconscious in their driveway, apparently overcome while trying to flee the poisonous gas. Dr. Thorshav died at Sacred Heart Hospital. 2 days later, the scene is an out-of-the-way part of Clay County, Alabama, near the tiny community of Waldo. This time, it's 16 cars of a seaboard coastline train. This time, the chemical is phosphoric acid, an ingredient used in making fertilizer. An estimated 30,000 gallons of the acid poured out of a tank car and ran into a small stream, which further down emptied into Talladega Creek. The city of Talladega, Alabama, draws its water supply from 2 downstream reservoirs supplied by Talladega Creek. City officials rushed to the scene to begin testing the contaminated water supply to determine the extent of phosphoric acid reaching the pumping stations on the reservoirs. At first, it was thought the chemical would have little effect on the city's drinking water, but within hours, health department officials said the phosphoric acid was not diluting as quickly as had been anticipated, and fish kills were reported as far as 13 miles below the scene of the derailment. Tons of lime were dumped into the water of the creek to try to counteract the effect of the acid. But it took flushing the creek with 210 million gallons of water from another reservoir to finally dilute the chemical and make the water safe for use. Quick action by the Talladega city officials ensured enough water to make it through the crisis when pumps were turned on to fill the city's tanks to capacity before the contaminated creek water reached the pumping stations. This was the second time in 10 years that the Talladega Creek has been polluted by chemicals spilled from a train derailment. The last occurred in 1967. As late as December 4th of this year, there was another potentially dangerous derailment here in Montgomery. 10 cars of a Gulf Mobile in Ohio through freight derailed in the northern section of the city, including 1 tank car loaded with propane gas. However, the tank car did not topple over and did not spill any of the gas into the surrounding area. Rail officials said the train was traveling at 20 miles an hour when it left the tracks. The cause of the accident, a broken rail. If there were a major train derailment in the city of Montgomery, who would be responsible and how quickly could they react? The answer to these questions and more about the rail risk in a moment. We've established the fact that the potential for a disastrous derailment exists in Montgomery. This conclusion prompts the question, is the city prepared to meet such an emergency situation? The Montgomery Fire Department is called on first in the event of a derailment. Chief James Odom describes the procedure followed by his department in the event of a major accident or derailment involving a toxic or hazardous material.
The first officer on the scene would try to get the bill of lading from the driver of the vehicle to find out what he had or look at the symbols on the vehicle. And of course then, according to what that is, would govern what we did. If it was a material that was hazardous or harmful to the citizenry, we would immediately start evacuating. Of course, in doing this, we would call on other agencies. The police department would be the first people we would call on to start warning the people to move out. Then we would apply streams of water to confine it if the chemical would stand water. Some chemicals, you get a giant reaction if you apply water, so we must know before we go into that step. We could move in with burial procedure, and we would then call on the city lot with their heavy equipment to start trenching, digging to where it could run in and cover it up. If it turned out to be a nuclear material, then we would call on people from Washington, which were the toll-free numbers, and they would immediately dispatch experts in here that are trained on standby readiness to cover this situation. Of course, they would be in contact with us, telling us what to do till they get here.
Mayor Emery Falmer says the city of Montgomery has instituted a master plan to deal with emergency situations.
One of the first things I did when I came to City Hall was to put in a emergency command post, so to speak, just for disaster that might take place, hoping one never would. We have communication capability of calling for support from Maxwell Air Force Base, from surrounding towns, for mobilizing the citizens, even have an override switch to where we can get in and call all the news media to ask them to get word out on crowd control or stay away from an area or something like this. We have a plan in the sense that we are able to immediately respond to an emergency, but we don't have a plan of what would happen if the plane crashed or something like that. We could respond to that, or if a tank car turned over and caused an explosion, we could respond to that and deal with that. Or we could respond to a truck that was carrying explosives and it blew up or something. But those are the type of plans that we have and are available to us at this time.
The police department works in conjunction with the firemen and in the past has been successful in containing some potentially dangerous incidents involving hazardous materials. Chief C.E. Swindle recalls a recent accident involving an overturned tank truck filled with highly flammable liquid oxygen.
The fire department advised us what the tanker contained and what we would need to do to secure the citizens in the immediate surrounding vicinity. We moved them back, cleared the stores. It was happened in a parking lot of a shopping center. We cleared the stores. No one came to the stores to open up. We didn't let them in the stores at that time. And for some 4 hours, we cleared the area around there. In case we did have an explosion, it wouldn't injure anybody.
Well, we feel that we're prepared to handle an unusual situation. We have certain procedures that are established that we go through should an accident occur in our cities. We have literature and materials that's readily available on the most common type materials on how to handle it. If it's beyond this, then we have toll-free numbers and communication center that 24 hours a day that we can call and get immediate attention, and they will give us the information that we need how to handle that or put us in touch with someone that can. And we have used these numbers in the past years from time to time, and it's worked completely successful.
How well trained are your police officers in handling situations like we've been talking about?
Well, they're adequately trained in handling any unusual circumstance. After they learn of what the nature of the problem is, that we start taking the preventative steps then to secure the place. Once it's happened, why, it's already happened, and there's not much you can do about that. But we can take steps to ensure that the incident does not get worse and more people become injured.
We asked Chief Odom if his men were informed of when these materials were being moved through the city.
We have no way of knowing this, and we cannot get this information. It's our understanding in talking with Mr. Atkins in Birmingham on the ICC that Title 49 was passed by Congress some years back, but no monies have been made available for police or work or keeping up with it. So we have no idea when something is coming through the city and how often or what it is. Mm-hmm. We have to handle it as the situation arises. We have to first find the bill of lading, check for stickers on the vehicles, and go step by step from that point.
We have no way of compelling the railroad to give us a shipping manifest of what they're carrying. As a matter of fact, I doubt that the local level has any idea when LP gas or explosives or anything else would be coming through. In addition to that, we have no authority to regulate what the trains would carry on their roadbed. And there are several railroads that come into Montgomery, and cars are cross-shipped on each other's lines. And well, in answer to your question, a short answer, we have no authority to deal with what is shipped into Montgomery on rail cars. So we don't know what they're shipping. Neither do we know what's in every 18-wheel truck that goes up and down the interstate or other highways.
But a spokesman for the western of Alabama, which ships large quantities of hazardous materials through Montgomery, says that his company does know exactly what is being brought into Montgomery through a sophisticated computer link-up between the Chester Yard office here in Montgomery and the main dispatching office in Atlanta, Georgia.
Well, sir, we get an advanced consist of the train that would be carrying hazardous materials some 3 or 4 hours before its arrival. And as I said, the inbound conductor and engineman on the train arriving at Chester know the location of the hazardous material cars. Our yard masters, our general yard masters and clerks, and our clerk operators are all alerted as to the arrival of the train. We have advanced copies of the advanced consist, and all the officers and our people that are involved in the movement of the train are aware of these cars.
Do you think that you're handling these materials as safely as they can possibly be handled?
We feel that we're doing everything that can be done of a practical nature to handle the car safely. Yes, sir.
How often do hazardous materials pass over these rails through the city of Montgomery, shipped by your line and by other members of the family lines?
Well, we move cars of a hazardous nature through Montgomery on a daily basis. However, I must emphasize that those cars do not operate over all of the tracks in the yard. We have certain designated tracks that we use for the cars that are handling hazardous materials.
What safety precautions are given to these cars when they move through the yard?
Well, sir, these cars are programmed into our computer, and the cars are placed in the train in a specified manner. That is, there are handles a certain number of cars behind the engine and a certain number of cars ahead of the caboose. In addition to that, our conductors and enginemen know the exact location in their train of any cars that are carrying hazardous materials.
Granted, the railroads, no matter how hard they try, cannot prevent derailments. And they'll be the first to admit that they're closely supervised and inspected by agencies of the federal government.
We consider our tracks well within the FRA standards that are dictated for the kind of track that we operate on here in Chester Yard. For instance, in 1977, we budgeted better than $1 million for our maintenance of way. That's our bridges and our other structures and our track structure.
What type of percentage of, say, your gross income is that figure?
14 cents out of every dollar goes into our maintenance way program, and that's every dollar of revenue.
The Western Railroad of Alabama was not singled out for criticism or praise in our look at rail transportation, but rather was chosen because of the high volume of hazardous materials it transports through the city. Can more be done to prevent a situation like Pensacola from happening here in Montgomery, Alabama? I'll be back with a suggestion for just such a plan to try to reduce the rail risk in a moment. So far, we've established that the potential for a major accident exists in Montgomery and that the city is prepared to react. But more can be done to help this situation. If there were a notification system between the railroads and the city to allow the fire and police departments to know the location and quantity of hazardous materials, perhaps precious minutes could be saved in responding to a rail accident or derailment. This early warning system could familiarize local authorities as to the train schedules and could assist them in keeping alert during the times that the toxic, poisonous, or explosive cargoes are in transit through Montgomery. It's a system that's been instigated in other cities, such as Memphis, Tennessee. In Memphis, the railroad notifies the fire department when any derailment occurs, even if it involves only an empty boxcar. And the railroad lets the fire department know exactly when extremely hazardous materials are coming into town. If some of this cargo is delayed or held up for some reason, the fire department is told its content and location.
Is there any system of notification to cities through which your trains pass to let them know that hazardous materials are coming through their town?
No, sir, not as such. As I say, these trains operate through the various communities that we serve on a daily basis. And the citizens of the towns and the city fathers and the fire departments and so forth are aware that these materials are moving, but only on a daily basis.
Would it be feasible to set up a program of notifying the fire departments or police departments in cities when these materials are passing through their communities?
Well, it certainly would be well worth the investigating the feasibility of such a program. We would want to emphasize the fact that if it became routine, that we feel that it would lose its viability then.
Why hasn't this been done before?
Well, sir, I really can't answer that. I'm not qualified to say why that it hadn't been done before, but as I say, it certainly would be worthwhile to investigate the feasibility of such a program. How it would be implemented, of course, would take a great deal of study.
What do you see as the future of rail traffic and hazardous chemicals? Do you think there will be any change in the way chemicals are handled? Do you think there will be any improvement in the communication between cities and rail carriers? Do you think this is a viable alternative?
Yes, sir, I do. I think communication, of course, is key to almost all of our relationships with the communities. We feel, people on the Western Railway of Alabama feel like we're citizens of each of the communities that we serve and that we pass through, and that we certainly feel that we have an obligation as citizens of that community to handle our business in a business-like manner and as safely as we possibly can.
Mayor Falmer said that the city of Montgomery would welcome such a plan and said it would be a giant step forward. It would certainly be beneficial to all of the citizens of the city of Montgomery and other towns and communities in Alabama if such a system could be implemented.
Our suggestion for an early warning system, so to speak, between the city and the railroad company is just that, a suggestion. But we feel because of the fact that Montgomery has been spared from a serious rail accident, that only increases the odds that someday it will happen. And we think that the plan, which has worked in other cities and other states, can work here in Montgomery and can significantly reduce the rail risk. This is Bob Howell, WSFA TV News.
The rail risk, the rolling danger around us, has been a WSFA TV News special report.